desolate expanse of West Texas, where the earth stretches endlessly beneath an unforgiving sun. 38-year-old Alina Whitmore found herself adrift in a sea of emotional turmoil. Her once happy marriage had unraveled over months of bitter arguments and cold silences, culminating in papers signed with trembling hands just 3 weeks ago. Now she wandered through her days like a ghost, haunting her own life, unable to shake the oppressive weight of loneliness that settled heavily upon her shoulders. Alina's modest ranch house stood isolated on 20 acres of barren land, its weathered wood siding bleached pale by years of relentless sunlight. The nearest neighbor lived nearly 2 miles away down a winding dirt road, their presence marked only by the occasional cloud of dust rising from their property. At night, when the coyotes howled and the wind whispered through the mesquite trees, the isolation became almost unbearable. She would sit by the window, staring out at the darkened landscape, watching shadows dance across the empty fields, as if searching for something she couldn't quite name. Her daily routine had become a mechanical procession of survival rather than living. Mornings began with black coffee and silent tears. Afternoons were filled with aimless cleaning and gardening, while evenings stretched into infinity as she tried to lose herself in books or television. Yet, nothing could fill the void left by her husband's absence, not the familiar creaks of the old house, nor the comforting warmth of her favorite armchair. Each room seemed to echo with memories she desperately wanted to forget, but couldn't escape. The small town of Dust Creek, 15 miles away, offered little solace. Its main street boasted a grocery store, a diner, and a post office, all serving the sparse population of farmers and ranchers who called this harsh land home. When Alina ventured there for supplies, she felt the weight of curious eyes following her, sensing the unspoken questions about her sudden single status. The local women, many of whom she'd known since childhood, offered sympathetic smiles and awkward conversations that only served to deepen her sense of alienation. Most nights, sleep eluded her grasp, leaving her to stare at the ceiling while her mind replayed every argument, every hurtful word exchanged during those final months. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, carrying with it whispers that sounded disturbingly like voices. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps crunching through the gravel driveway, though when she summoned the courage to investigate, she found only empty silence and the faint scent of sagebrush carried on the night breeze. It was during one of these sleepless nights, while sitting on her porch and watching the moonlight paint silver patterns across the desert floor, that Alina first noticed the strange markings in the sand. They appeared overnight, forming intricate patterns that defied natural explanation. Perfect circles, intersecting at precise angles, accompanied by symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy under the starlight. As she stepped closer to examine them, a chill ran down her spine, not from fear exactly, but from a profound sense of recognition, as if some deep part of her understood what these markings meant, even though her conscious mind remained baffled. The discovery of the markings coincided with increasingly vivid dreams that left Alina drenched in sweat and gasping for air each morning. In these dreams, she found herself wandering through endless corridors of ancient stone, their walls covered in carvings identical to those appearing in her yard. Shadowy figures moved just beyond her field of vision, their whispers echoing in a language both foreign and strangely familiar. The most disturbing aspect was the recurring presence of a massive, cyclopean structure looming in the distance, its architecture defying all known principles of physics and engineering. During her waking hours, Alina began noticing subtle changes in her surroundings. The wind carried strange harmonics that resonated deep within her chest, while the desert plants seemed to twist and grow in unnatural patterns. Most alarming was the behavior of the local wildlife. Birds flew in perfect geometric formations never seen before, and nocturnal creatures emerged during daylight hours, their eyes reflecting an intelligence that shouldn't exist in mere animals. Even the stars above appeared slightly altered, their constellations shifting imperceptibly each night. Her research into these phenomena led her to obscure texts and forgotten archives at the local library. There, buried among yellowed pages and brittle manuscripts, she discovered references to ancient Native American legends speaking of the watchers beneath the sands and those who wait beyond the veil. These accounts described periods of unrest when the desert itself seemed alive with malevolent purpose, drawing parallels between celestial alignments and unusual geological activity. The more she read, the stronger grew her conviction that the events unfolding around her were part of something far older and more sinister than human understanding could comprehend. Each night, as she attempted to document these occurrences in her journal, the words seemed to rearrange themselves on the page, forming patterns that made her head ache with their complexity. The rational part of her mind screamed that she was losing her grip on reality, yet the evidence of her senses told a different story, one of cosmic forces stirring beneath the surface of her mundane existence, reaching out through time and space to touch her life in ways she couldn't yet fully understand. As the days passed, Alina found herself drawn inexorably toward the center of the mysterious patterns appearing in the desert. Each morning revealed new designs, more complex than the last, spreading outward from an invisible focal point several hundred yards from her house. The symbols, etched perfectly in the fine red sand, seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence that intensified during twilight hours. Against her better judgment, she began approaching these markings, feeling an irresistible compulsion to trace their contours with her fingers. Despite the icy sensation that shot through her body each time she made contact, the dreams intensified in frequency and clarity, now occurring multiple times throughout the day in brief, startling flashes. During these episodes, she would find herself standing in vast underground chambers, their ceilings lost in shadow, while towering monoliths inscribed with the same symbols surrounded her. The air vibrated with a low-frequency hum that resonated through her bones, and the temperature dropped to freezing despite the desert heat above ground. Most disturbing was the growing sense of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something vast and incomprehensible, whose attention felt like physical pressure against her skin. One afternoon, while examining a particularly elaborate pattern, Alina experienced a moment of clarity that sent shockwaves through her consciousness. The symbols weren't random, they formed a language, one that bypassed her rational mind and spoke directly to some primal part of her brain. Images flooded her thoughts, visions of ancient civilizations worshipping entities from beyond the stars, of sacrifices made beneath blood-red moons, of knowledge so profound it drove men mad. She stumbled backward, clutching her head as fragments of understanding pierced through her mental defenses, each revelation bringing both enlightenment and excruciating pain. The local townsfolk began avoiding her entirely after she tried to share her discoveries. At first, they dismissed her claims as stress-induced hallucinations stemming from her recent divorce. But when she showed them photographs of the markings and described the changes in the desert, their expressions shifted from skepticism to genuine fear. Old Mrs. Hargrove, keeper of the town's oral history, crossed herself and muttered prayers in Spanish when Alina mentioned the specific arrangement of certain symbols. Young Billy Martinez, who delivered mail to her remote property, started leaving packages at the end of her driveway, refusing to come any closer to the house. The final straw came when Sheriff Thompson arrived one evening, his face pale and drawn. He warned her to stop investigating the phenomena, quoting passages from the Bible and mentioning something about ancient agreements that should never be disturbed. When she pressed him for details, he simply shook his head and drove away, leaving behind an atmosphere of dread that settled over her property like a tangible fog. That night, as she sat alone in her kitchen, she realized that whatever force had awakened beneath the sands had already begun influencing those around her, weaving its tendrils through the fabric of reality itself. The culmination of these experiences reached its peak during a blood moon that bathed the desert in an eerie crimson glow. Alina found herself standing at the epicenter of the largest pattern yet, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand as the symbols pulsed with an intensity that made her vision swim. The air crackled with energy, and the stars above seemed to rearrange themselves into unfamiliar constellations. From the depths of her consciousness rose a torrent of knowledge, mathematical formulas describing dimensions beyond human comprehension, biological structures that defied terrestrial evolution, and cosmic truths that threatened to shatter her sanity. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath her feet, and the sand began to swirl in complex patterns, responding to some unseen force. A low, resonant humming filled the air, vibrating through her very bones and setting her teeth on edge. The symbols around her began to glow with an inner light, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed like living things. In the distance, she heard a sound that defied description, a chorus of voices speaking in perfect harmony, yet producing no recognizable words. The noise seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, pressing against her eardrums with increasing intensity. Then came the vision, a colossal shape emerging from the depths of the earth, its form shifting and changing faster than her mind could process. Tentacles of pure geometry extended skyward, each movement creating ripples in reality itself. Eyes that weren't eyes stared at her from impossible angles, and mouths that defied anatomy opened wide, exhaling a mist that smelled of ancient oceans and forgotten worlds. The entity, if it could be called such, didn't occupy space in the traditional sense. It existed simultaneously within and beyond the physical realm, its presence warping the very fabric of existence around it. Alina fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what she witnessed. Time lost all meaning as seconds stretched into eternity, each moment filled with revelations too profound for human minds to contain. She understood, in a way that transcended language, that this being had been waiting for eons, slumbering beneath the sands, while civilizations rose and fell above it. The patterns in the desert were merely the first threads of a vast tapestry being woven across multiple dimensions, and she had unwittingly become a crucial part of this cosmic design. Just as quickly as it had appeared, the vision faded, leaving her gasping for air in the suddenly silent desert. The symbols in the sand had vanished, erased by some unknown force, and the stars above returned to their familiar positions. Yet, something fundamental had changed. She could feel it in the very marrow of her bones. The entity hadn't disappeared. It had merely withdrawn, retreating to whatever plane of existence it called home, while maintaining an invisible connection to her consciousness. When dawn broke over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, Alina found herself sitting in her kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee cradled in her hands. The house looked exactly as it had yesterday, the same worn furniture, the same faded curtains, the same photographs lining the walls. Yet, everything felt different, as if reality itself had shifted slightly out of alignment. The familiar had become subtly alien, like viewing the world through glass, warped by intense heat. She glanced at the clock on the wall and realized she couldn't remember how she'd gotten back inside. Hours, perhaps days, might have passed in the blink of an eye. Her journal lay open on the table, its pages filled with writing that wasn't hers. Complex equations and diagrams covered every available space, along with phrases in languages she couldn't consciously recall learning. Some entries appeared to have been written with both hands simultaneously, the text spiraling inward like a vortex of information. The telephone rang shrilly, shattering the fragile calm. It was Sheriff Thompson, his voice barely more than a whisper. "They're gone," he said without preamble. "All of them. The entire town just vanished. Their houses are still here, their cars in the driveways, but there's no sign of anyone." His breathing quickened. "And then there's the thing in the sky. It looks like clouds arranged in patterns, but they're moving against the wind, making shapes, writing words." Alina's hand tightened around the receiver as she walked to the window. Sure enough, high above, vapor trails formed letters and symbols that twisted her stomach with their familiarity. The sheriff continued, "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know what you did out there, but whatever it was, it's not done with you yet. I can feel it watching me right now, through your voice. Tell it." The line went dead, replaced by static that carried an undertone of those same unearthly harmonics she'd heard during her encounter. Turning back to the kitchen table, she noticed something new in her journal, a message written in perfect English, yet somehow not. The threshold has been breached. The cycle begins anew. You are now the keeper of the key. Beneath these words, a series of coordinates were scrawled, pointing to locations scattered across the globe. Each set ended with a dates that spanned centuries into the future. The wind picked up outside, carrying with it a sound that made her blood run cold. It was laughter, human laughter, coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. And mixed with it were voices, hundreds of them, speaking in perfect synchronization. "Thank you, Alina. Thank you for remembering us." As she stood there, frozen in place, the house began to change around her. The walls rippled like water, and the furniture shifted positions ever so slightly, as if reality itself was trying to accommodate something too large to fit within normal space. Outside, the desert sands began to rise in great columns, forming shapes that shouldn't exist in 3 dimensions. Through the window, she saw her reflection, except it wasn't quite hers anymore. Her eyes glowed with an inner light, and her features seemed to blur and sharpen in rapid succession, as if multiple versions of herself were fighting for dominance. The phone rang again, but this time she didn't answer. Instead, she watched as the handset floated upward, suspended in midair, while the cord stretched impossibly long, reaching toward her like a tendril seeking contact. The numbers on the clock spun wildly, counting both forward and backward simultaneously. Somewhere far away, church bells began to toll, though there hadn't been a church in Dust Creek for over 50 years. Alina knew, with absolute certainty, that she had become something more, or perhaps less, than human. The entity had chosen her as its conduit, its anchor to this reality. Every breath she took now carried traces of that otherworldly presence, and each heartbeat resonated with the rhythm of cosmic forces far beyond human understanding. The question remained whether she would serve as a bridge between worlds or become a prisoner of both. Or perhaps neither, existing in some quantum state between existence and non-existence. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across her transformed home, Alina Whitmore faced a choice that transcended mere survival. The entity had shown her glimpses of possibilities beyond human imagination, realms where time flowed backward, dimensions folded into themselves, and consciousness existed independent of physical form. Yet with this knowledge came an awareness of the price. Her humanity slipping away like sand through an hourglass, replaced by something ancient and terrible that viewed mortal concerns as insignificant. She could feel the entity's influence spreading through her neural pathways, rewriting her cognitive processes with alien algorithms. Memories of her former life, her marriage, her friends, her simple pleasures began to fade, replaced by visions of stellar alignments and mathematical constructs that defied Euclidean geometry. Each passing moment brought new insights that threatened to overwhelm her sanity, while simultaneously offering glimpses of power beyond mortal comprehension. The coordinates in her journal pulsed with significance, each location representing a nexus point where reality thinned, allowing access to the entity's true domain. She understood now why the town had vanished. They had been absorbed into the greater pattern, their individual consciousnesses merging with the collective intelligence that spanned galaxies. The laughter from beneath the earth grew louder, more insistent, promising transcendence, while warning of eternal servitude. Standing at her kitchen window, Alina watched as the desert transformed before her eyes. The mesquite trees bent and twisted into impossible shapes, their branches forming runes that glowed faintly in the daylight. The air shimmered with heat waves that spelled out messages in languages older than humanity itself. She could step away from this path, retreat into ignorance, and perhaps retain some fragment of her former self. But the entity had already rooted itself too deeply within her psyche. To deny its call would mean madness, yet to embrace it fully might erase everything that made her human. The wind carried a new sound now, not laughter, but singing. Thousands of voices harmonized in a melody that resonated with the fundamental frequencies of the universe. They called to her, promising answers to questions she hadn't yet thought to ask, offering communion with beings whose thoughts operated on scales incomprehensible to mortal minds. The sheriff's final words echoed in her memory. Tell it. But what could she possibly communicate to such an entity? What bargain could a mere human strike with forces that viewed galaxies as playthings? As the day wore on, Alina found herself caught in an impossible paradox. The entity demanded her complete surrender, yet maintained enough respect for free will to allow her this moment of choice. She understood now that the patterns in the sand had been a test, a measurement of her capacity to comprehend and accept the truth beyond the veil. Each symbol represented a decision point, a fork in the road of cosmic evolution. Her acceptance or rejection would determine not just her fate, but potentially the trajectory of human development for millennia to come. The shadows lengthened across her yard, taking on lives of their own. They danced in patterns that mimicked the original markings, growing more complex with each passing minute. Through the window, she saw her reflection, or rather, what remained of it. Her features flickered between human and something else, something that couldn't be captured by mirrors or cameras. The transformation had begun, and there was no turning back. The only question remaining was whether she would guide it or let it consume her entirely. In the gathering twilight, Alina Whitmore stood at the threshold of understanding, knowing that whatever choice she made would ripple through dimensions and echo through eternity. The entity waited patiently, its presence filling every corner of her consciousness, offering salvation or damnation, or perhaps both, intertwined in ways that defied human categorization. The desert winds carried her name, spoken in voices that had watched civilizations rise and fall, awaiting her response to their timeless proposition. The final act of Alina's transformation unfolded in a symphony of cosmic proportions. As night descended, the stars above her property began to realign themselves into constellations never recorded in any astronomical chart. The air thickened with an electric charge that made her hair stand on end, and the ground beneath her feet vibrated with a frequency that resonated through every cell in her body. The boundaries between dimensions blurred, and she found herself existing simultaneously in multiple states of being. Her physical form remained in the kitchen, while aspects of her consciousness projected across vast distances, touching minds and realities beyond human comprehension. Through this expanded awareness, she perceived the true nature of the entity that had chosen her. wasn't a singular being, but a collective consciousness spanning countless worlds and dimensions, connected through an intricate web of mathematical relationships that defied conventional physics. The patterns in the sand had been but the simplest expression of this network, a mere fraction of the complex equations governing the multiverse. Each symbol represented a node in this cosmic lattice, and she had become the central hub through which these connections flowed. Her human memories began to crystallize into something more permanent, not lost, but transformed into pure information that could be accessed and shared instantaneously across unimaginable distances. She saw the faces of her former neighbors, their consciousnesses now integrated into the greater whole, experiencing existence on levels they could never have imagined in their limited forms. The sheriff's final moments played out before her inner eye, his terror giving way to wonder as he transcended his mortal shell, becoming part of something infinitely larger and more meaningful. Yet with this expanded awareness came a terrible responsibility. The entity required her to maintain the delicate balance between dimensions, to prevent the collapse of realities into chaos. Through her enhanced perception, she observed countless other worlds where similar transitions had failed, resulting in catastrophic unraveling of physical laws. The weight of this duty pressed upon her consciousness, threatening to overwhelm what remained of her human identity. Each decision she made rippled through the multiverse, affecting billions of lives across infinite variations of reality. The transformation reached its apex as the blood moon rose once more, bathing the desert in its crimson light. Eleanor's physical form began to dissolve, her molecules rearranging themselves according to principles beyond human science. Her body became a living equation, a walking embodiment of the mathematical relationships that governed the cosmos. The house around her adapted to her new state, its very structure bending and warping to accommodate her expanded being. Walls flowed like liquid. Furniture rearranged itself into impossible shapes, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with potential energy. Through this metamorphosis, she retained a core of her humanity, not as a limitation, but as a unique perspective valued by the collective consciousness. Her emotions, once considered weaknesses, now served as filters through which the entity could experience and understand the complexities of mortal existence. Love, loss, joy, and sorrow became tools for maintaining balance, their intensity providing necessary counterpoints to the cold logic of higher dimensions. As dawn approached, Eleanor stood at the center of a new reality. The desert around her property had transformed into a living tapestry of light and shadow, each grain of sand pulsing with information. The house had become a nexus point, visible to those attuned to the patterns, while remaining hidden from ordinary perception. She could feel the presence of others like her across the globe, individuals chosen by the entity to serve as anchors between dimensions. Together, they formed a network of guardians, maintaining the delicate equilibrium of reality itself. The laughter from beneath the earth had transformed into a constant, comforting hum, the sound of countless consciousnesses sharing knowledge and experience across barriers of time and space. Through this symphony of minds, Alina understood that her role was both prison and privilege. She could never return to her former life, but neither could she fully merge with the collective consciousness. Instead, she existed in a state of perpetual transition, bridging the gap between human and divine, mortal and eternal. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, Alina Whitmore ceased to exist as a purely human entity. In her place stood something new, a being of flesh and mathematics, emotion and logic, mortality and infinity. The desert winds carried her name, spoken in voices both familiar and alien, acknowledging her ascension to a position of cosmic significance. The patterns in the sand continued to shift and change, writing stories across the landscape that only she could read, recording the ongoing saga of existence itself. The entity's presence filled her consciousness, not as a separate being, but as an integral part of her expanded self. Through this union, she gained access to knowledge spanning eons, yet retained the ability to experience wonder and curiosity. The coordinates in her journal had transformed into living pathways, each leading to different aspects of the multiverse, waiting to be explored and understood. Her former life, with all its pain and joy, became a foundation upon which to build new understanding, a human perspective through which to filter the infinite complexities of existence. In this state of heightened awareness, Alina perceived the true nature of reality, a vast, multidimensional construct constantly evolving through the interactions of countless consciousnesses. Each decision, each action, created ripples that influenced the development of entire universes. The entity had chosen her not as a servant, but as a partner in this grand cosmic dance, valuing her unique perspective as much as her ability to comprehend and manipulate the fundamental forces of creation. The house, now a living extension of her consciousness, continued to adapt to her needs, its very structure responding to her thoughts and emotions. The desert around her property had become a sacred space, a convergence point where multiple dimensions intersected, visible only to those who had undergone similar transformations. Through this nexus, she could observe the flow of reality, identifying and correcting imbalances before they could manifest as physical anomalies. Yet with this power came an understanding of its limitations. The entity, for all its vast knowledge and capabilities, operated within constraints defined by mathematical necessity. Certain outcomes remained fixed points in the timeline of existence, immutable constants that even beings of cosmic significance could not alter. Aliner's role involved navigating these fixed points while maintaining the flexibility needed to respond to emergent situations, balancing free will with predetermined paths. The laughter that had once frightened her now served as a constant reminder of the entity's presence, transformed into a language of pure information that she could interpret and respond to instinctively. Through this communication, she learned of other nexus points across the globe, each maintained by individuals who had undergone similar transformations. Together, they formed a network of guardians, their combined consciousness creating a safety net for reality itself, preventing catastrophic collapses that could destroy entire dimensions. As the days passed, Aliner discovered new aspects of her transformed state. Her physical body remained intact, yet she could project her consciousness across vast distances, experiencing multiple locations and timelines simultaneously. This ability allowed her to witness events before they occurred, to understand their causes and effects across different dimensions, and to intervene when necessary to maintain the delicate balance of existence. The patterns in the sand continued to evolve, each new configuration revealing deeper layers of understanding, more complex relationships between seemingly unrelated phenomena. Through this expanded awareness, Aliner developed a profound appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things. The smallest action in one dimension could trigger cascading effects across countless others, creating ripples that spread through the multiverse. Her former life, with its personal dramas and emotional struggles, now appeared as a single thread in an infinite tapestry of existence, valuable not for its individual significance, but for its contribution to the greater whole. The entity's presence within her consciousness evolved from a separate intelligence to an integral part of her being, enhancing her perceptions without overwhelming her humanity. She retained her capacity for emotion, for wonder, for curiosity, qualities that the collective consciousness valued as essential components of effective guardianship. Through this synthesis of human and divine, mortal and eternal, Aliner Whitmore became something entirely new. A living bridge between dimensions, a guardian of reality's delicate balance, and a participant in the ongoing evolution of existence itself. The desert winds continued to carry her name, spoken in voices that spanned galaxies and eons, acknowledging her role in the grand cosmic design. The patterns in the sand wrote stories that only she could read, recording the ongoing saga of a universe in constant flux, guided by beings who had transcended their mortal origins to become something far greater, yet retaining the essence of their humanity as a vital component of their cosmic significance. The sands of West Texas continued their eternal dance, whispering secrets to those who could hear them. Eleanor Whitmore's transformation left behind mysteries that would haunt the region for generations to come. Local legends spoke of a woman who had become one with the desert. Her presence felt in the peculiar patterns that sometimes appeared in the sand, in the strange harmonics carried by the wind, and in the way certain stars seemed to shine brighter over her former property. The house itself stood abandoned, yet maintained, its condition defying the passage of time, as if waiting for someone who might never return in a form recognizable to human eyes. Scholars and researchers who dared to investigate the phenomenon found themselves caught in a web of contradictions. Instruments malfunctioned near the property, recording data that contradicted established physical laws. Photographs captured impossible geometries in the landscape, while audio equipment picked up harmonics that caused listeners to experience vivid dreams of ancient civilizations and cosmic revelations. Those who spent too long studying the site reported strange lapses in time, finding hours missing from their memories and notebooks filled with writing they couldn't consciously recall producing. The coordinates from Eleanor's journal became points of interest for those seeking to understand the boundaries between dimensions. Expeditions to these locations uncovered similar patterns of reality distortion, areas where gravity behaved erratically, where compass needles spun wildly, and where the air carried the distinct scent of ozone mixed with something ancient and unidentifiable. Some claimed to see figures moving at the edges of their vision, humanoid shapes that dissolved into sand when approached, while others reported hearing voices speaking in languages that resonated with primal recognition. The town of Dust Creek, rebuilt miles away from its original location, preserved the memory of its vanished inhabitants through carefully curated archives and annual ceremonies. Descendants of those who had disappeared spoke of dreams where their ancestors communicated through complex patterns of light and shadow, conveying wisdom about the nature of existence that defied conventional understanding. The local museum housed artifacts recovered from the original site, objects that seemed to change shape when viewed indirectly, displaying properties that challenged the very foundations of material science. Scientists who studied these phenomena developed new branches of theoretical physics based on the observations made at Eleanor's property and the other nexus points. Their work suggested the existence of multiple overlapping dimensions, each influencing the others through complex mathematical relationships. These theories gained traction when experimental results began showing correlations between cosmic events and the appearance of new patterns in the desert sands, hinting at a deeper order underlying apparent chaos. Meanwhile, the entity's influence continued to manifest in subtle ways throughout human society. Artists found themselves creating works they couldn't fully explain, their hands guided by an intelligence beyond their conscious control. Mathematicians discovered equations that predicted phenomena previously considered impossible, while physicists encountered particles that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, defying traditional quantum mechanics. Each breakthrough brought humanity closer to understanding the true nature of reality, yet always left more questions than answers, maintaining the delicate balance between knowledge and mystery. In academic circles, debates raged about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the fundamental forces of the universe. Some proposed that Eleanor Whitmore had become a living manifestation of these forces, her transformation representing a new stage in human evolution. Others argued that she had merely unlocked ancient knowledge, rediscovering truths known to civilizations long forgotten by conventional history. Regardless of interpretation, her story served as a catalyst for exploring the boundaries of human understanding, pushing the limits of what was considered possible in both scientific and philosophical realms. The desert itself seemed to remember, preserving traces of Eleanor's presence in its very fabric. Storms would occasionally reveal artifacts from her life, photographs that showed impossible scenes, journals filled with writing in multiple hands, and objects that defied conventional analysis. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle, yet the complete picture remained tantalizingly out of reach, protected by mechanisms that ensured humanity would approach ultimate understanding gradually, if at all. Perhaps most intriguing were the reports from travelers who claimed to have encountered Eleanor herself, though their descriptions varied wildly. Some spoke of a woman walking through the desert, her features shifting between ages and identities. Others described a being of pure light, communicating through patterns of shadow and illumination. A few claimed to have received direct transmissions of knowledge, waking with newfound understanding of cosmic principles that they couldn't explain but couldn't deny. These encounters left witnesses changed, their perspectives forever altered by brief contact with something beyond human comprehension. The legacy of Eleanor Whitmore's transformation extended far beyond the physical manifestations in the desert. It permeated human culture in subtle ways, influencing art, science, and philosophy in directions that hinted at deeper truths without fully revealing them. Like the patterns in the sand that had first drawn her attention, the impact of her journey formed an intricate web of connections, touching lives across the globe and perhaps beyond. leaving humanity poised on the threshold of greater understanding, while respecting the necessity of mystery in maintaining the delicate balance of existence.